Welcome to the second Wednesday in June, a wet Wednesday in Cape Town. My name is Mark Long, Rector of the Parish of St Andrew in Newlands. Welcome to Wednesdays with Mark, and today I would like to touch on a passage from Philippians chapter 2, verses 5 to 7. They say, "Let the same mind be in you that was in Christ Jesus, who, though he was in the form of God, did not regard equality with God as something to be exploited, but emptied himself, taking the form of a slave, being born in human likeness." Different translation, though he was God, he did not think of equality with God as something to cling to. Instead, he gave up his divine privileges. He took the humble position of a slave and born as a human being. Now, I don't know how you respond to those verses. I don't know what the images you carry with that. But for me, it's this wonderful picture of Jesus letting go of the glories of heaven, as it were, and coming to be part of the everyday nature of what it is to be human in this world. And within that context, to express something of the nature of God and to model that in our midst, to embrace life in its fullness. We find him doing that in places that certainly leave me quite discomforted quite often, and clearly for many of the disciples as well. He eats with tax collectors. He talks with women at the well. He does all sorts of things that his society consider unacceptable. And yet it's those places that he goes into to demonstrate what the wholeness and fullness of life is all about. And I have a sense that as God's people, we are called to make that fullness and wholeness of life something real in our own experience and in our relationships. Now, in the last week or two, we've been faced with the whole issue of racism, not just in our South African context, but in our global context, certainly in the Western world. Since George Floyd's murder at the hands of police, and the horrific situation, it's just lifted the lid on the deep hurts that people of color in the variety of our world societies continue to experience and know. And the South African context, it's something that we are not unaware of with our apartheid background. The sadness for me is how little life seems to have changed in terms of the experience of people of color since 1994. One of the difficulties is how do we make a change? And the nature of racism is that at the moment, certainly it's experienced as institutionalized, and any racism that's institutionalized, of course, impacts on us personally. And it's institutionalized because we maintain it in some form. And as a white person, I have to own that maintenance. And I hope if you are a white person, you would be willing to own that with me. It's discomforting, deeply discomforting to do that. But it's important because as we hear and listen to those who are expressing the deep pain that they experience through both institutionalized racism but along with that, the many kind of microaggressions that go with it, often more difficult to deal with than the more blatant acts or racist behaviors that can take place. The challenge is for myself as a white person to really take time to listen, to hear, to hold something of the pain that people who are speaking out are seeking to express, and for me to be able to hold that, I think, is so important without reacting. And of course, the danger is that, well, it's not a danger, it's just a reality. That certainly for myself as a white person, and I think generally for us as white people, we tend to be reactive and aggressively reactive when we hear things like Black Lives Matter. We are reactive in wanting to throw out, well, all lives matter. or the lives of any particular group that are important to us matter. And that's not helpful for those that are seeking to express their pain. It's not to say that other people's lives don't matter. That's not what Black Lives Matter is all about. But Black Lives Matter is about really saying that people of color not only have experienced racism, but continue to express it and experience it. And for me, in our South African context, it would have been wonderful if we could have moved beyond that. And that was part, I think, of the dream of the Rainbow Nation, that we would do that. But in terms certainly of what young people in our schools are telling us about their experiences, people born after 94, very clearly racism is alive and it's well in this country, and we need to deal with it. And so for myself as a white person, very aware that I need to take time to actually stop and listen and really seek to hear what people of color in my context are experiencing without throwing up a reactive response to that. Seeking to look beyond some of perhaps the more aggressive explanations of that pain, to really dig down to what is racism, what is the impact of racism on the lives of many of my fellow South Africans, and what is my role in that? What are the microaggressions that I continuously put out there? And what do I need to change within myself? And that's often a lot harder. But I'm aware that if I can be aware, that it's in that awareness I can begin to work with what is wrong in my attitudes, in my behaviors, in my perspective, in my outlook. All those things that actually just often quietly drip into my relationships with other people and undermine the wholeness, the fullness of life that Jesus very clearly came to live and model. And so the passage from Philippians for me really important, that I need to be willing to let go of being right, let go of being whatever, in order to give space to others to not only express their pain, but actually find a way to heal from that pain. And sometimes that just means I need to get out of the way. I need to get out of the way of myself. I need to get out of the way of others. And one of the ways, the primary ways we're able to do that is by actually not reacting, but taking time to listen and then to respond in hopefully a more creative, loving, reconstructive way in terms of rebuilding relationships and a way forward. Certainly, I would want to say today, I think Jesus is a model for that. And certainly for myself as a Christian, as a person of faith, that's something I draw on, that relationship with God I draw on. But I'm very aware that if I do not hear, if I continue to just pretend that all is well with the world, actually the Spirit of God cannot bring healing, because I become a limitation to that. I become a blockage to that. I become an obstacle to that. And so I do invite you, if you, like me, are a pale native, in Max Dupree's words, if you have a white skin, let's take time to listen to our fellow South Africans, and take an opportunity to really seek to, in doing so, to begin to live differently, to relate more meaningfully and more deeply, and with a greater level of wholeness and fullness of life in it all.